Now, today we're going to hear all about Private Alabama Jones. And I had some people come in earlier and say, who is Private Alabama Jones? So we tried to pull it up on the internet. You can't find Private Alabama Jones on the internet. So we are all going to be pleasantly surprised. I just want to give you a little introduction for Chaplain Bupp. Chaplain Ron Bupp received a BA from Crossroads Bible College and a Master's of Theology degree from Crossroads Bible Graduate School of Divinity, and completed and earned a doctorate in ministry from Trinity Theological Seminary. Ron is a Civil War enthusiast with interest in the Battle of Gettysburg. He has given lectures at historical societies, colleges, high schools, and civic groups on the strategy, equipment, and ordnance used at Gettysburg and other related Civil War subjects. Ron served 4 years in the U.S. Marine Corps with time spent in Vietnam. He also served as chaplain's assistant and a retention NCO in the 108th Field Artillery, Army National Guard, as a sergeant out of Carlisle, PA. Ron is married with 2 daughters, Kristen and Sherry. It is my pleasure to welcome Chaplain Ron Bupp.
Linda is a sweetheart. I heard some folks over here saying, what is that with galvanized? What in the world is that about? I heard you. Galvanized, if you have a bucket, let's say, and it's a metal bucket, and you galvanize it with zinc, you cover it with zinc. So it's got a coating. This was a term that was used back 150 years ago, and it basically gives the idea that somebody who was, say, a rebel, a southerner, and that person now comes over to the Union Army, he now doesn't have that gray uniform covering on, he's now got a different covering. So that's the idea of the galvanized. He's got a new uniform, different covering. I want to mention about how I may have gotten started in this thing. Oh, by the way, that is not Alabama Jones up there. That is the 130th Pennsylvania Monument at the Battle of at Antietam, and it is at the Bloody Lane. We'll visit that subject in a few moments. Edward Raffensperger. I have 2 great uncles, not great-great uncles, great-great-great-great-uncle. My grandpa was born in 1874. So my family goes like this on my dad's side. So this is my great uncle. I had 2, Edward Raffensperger and Daniel Raffensperger. This was something that was in the family. Maybe you've seen one of these. It's about that wide and about that high, and I have it hanging on my wall at home. And it tells me where he had served, and one of them you may see. It mentions the 130th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry. Well, I got this when I was about 11 years old, and about that time was also the 1961 was the centennial for the Civil War. And for an 11-year-old boy living 28 miles from Gettysburg, it clicked. And then, let me go back. And then there was the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg in 1963, and I was a whopping 13 years old at the time, and I begged my dad to take me up to Gettysburg, and I remember standing in the circle as a parade went by. And after the parade was over, bits and pieces come into my mind, but we wind up in a barber shop on Chambersburg Street, off to the right, half a block out of the square. A barber shop, he was dealing in with some artifacts, and I begged Dad up. We got a mini ball. That did it. My collection started. And my interest was piqued by 2 family members directly related. Now let's get involved as to who this James Jones. His journey began in December of 1837 in Wilcox County, Alabama. Then again, that was not the name that John and Susan, his parents, gave him in 1837. It took James half a century to fess up to his birth name. Born in the Deep South, the 5th of 12 children, his only experience to life was rural, where he learned farming as a vocation. He would carry on throughout most of his life. At the age of 20, his life took a meandering course. For 20 years, the times and life of James was murky. However, we pick up his trail in August of 1862 when he arrived here in Carlisle. The town is filled with patriotic energy of William Potter's goal to raise a company to help fill the Pennsylvania's quota for enlistments. And on here is Company A, courtesy of Cumberland County Historical Society, and a little closer look, and you see James Jones. There he is. He's floating around there. And this is a little bit later, as you'll see. We'll get to that, Colonel Meisch. Now, is anybody here related to a Meisch or Meisch? Am I pronouncing it? I've never heard anybody pronounce that. Meisch, Meisch. Okay, we'll move on. So, this is a reunion poster of what Captain Porter looked like. Handsome man. Though from Alabama, he was caught up in the patriotic fervor and enlisted in Captain Porter's company. He stands 5'6" and weighs a healthy 150 pounds. The next stop for the neophyte company was Camp Curtin by way of the train station, which is not far where it used to be, or where we sit here, just out that way. Just over there, I believe it is. And then Camp Curtin. This is not a real good representation of Camp Curtin. Camp Curtin was one of the largest, if not the largest, Union enlistment camp in the entire Union Army, for the Union Army. There were thousands, tens of thousands that went through Camp Curtin. Anybody ever visit Camp Curtin up there? There's some museum, I think there's one up there. Anybody here familiar with the history of the 130th Pennsylvania? I'm always looking for somebody. And one thing I need to stop. Anybody here, a military veteran? Raise your hand if you're a veteran. What'd you serve in?
Air Force.
What'd you serve in?
Marine Corps.
All right. What'd you serve in?
Army.
Air Force, Army. Thank you for your service. Thank you. Talk with you later. No Navy guys. No Navy guys we can beat up here. So, okay. Navy?
My late husband was in the Navy.
Okay, we'll give him a pass.
When were you in Vietnam?
71, 72, caught the spring offensive of 72.
Long after I was
You were probably Tet?
65, 66.
Okay. We all missed Tet. We didn't miss much. I transgressed. I'm down the road. I don't want to go that way. Okay, let's go. The bustle of trains, wagons, civilians, soldiers, and the overcrowding heightens the air of enthusiasm. Soon after arrival, Mr. Jones becomes Private Jones in Company A with the Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry. Owing to his southern accent, which early on betrays his birth state, his messmates dub him Alabama Jones. That's why you can't find him on the internet. You won't find him on the internet because Alabama Jones is a nickname, number one. Number two, it's not his real name. And if you had his real name, you might not find him anyway. He's a elusive character. We'll find out why after a little bit. But to his closer companions and acquaintances, he is simply known as Alabama. Suspicions whirled about his silence to inquiries such as, "Where'd you come from?" or "Why are you here in Pennsylvania?" His allegiance would be tested in the months ahead. However, he would show himself to be true to the oath taken at Camp Curtin and the flag of the United States, under which he would come to blows on the battlefield unexpectedly with the state of his own birth. Now his avowed enemy. It was not unprecedented for captured soldiers to join the opposition. It's not unprecedented. As a matter of fact, there's a case where quite a few men were captured, and they were given the choice. You can either come on board with the 10th Tennessee Cavalry, or you can go to Andersonville. Make a choice. Many of them went, rather than go to Andersonville, preferred to go with the Confederate cavalry. So it's not unprecedented. His company was assigned to the 130th Pennsylvania Volunteers, which mustered in early in August of 1862 for 9 months. You will see a picture here of Colonel Zinn. Anybody recognize his name? Zinn's. Quite a few Zinns around. You do?
Yes.
You recognize him in particular?
Yes, the GAR post in Mechanicsburg.
Exactly. Good for you. Did your homework. He was actually born, I'm from Dover. Actually, I live in Dover. I was raised in New York City, but I live in Dover since I got out of the service. And it turns out that my research told me that less than a mile from where I live in Dover is where his homestead was. Eventually he moved and came to Cumberland Valley with his family. So he's a York Countyan originally. He got transplanted into Cumberland County. And then he would die, and get a little ahead of myself, he would die at the Battle of Fredericksburg trying to hold the flag. The flag. That is a particular issue that I think we who have been in the service have much appreciated, particularly those with a Marine Corps background. There's something about the flag, always. And so he was trying to pick up the flag, hold the flag in front of the stone wall at Fredericksburg, and he was shot through the face and would die. Probably a headshot directly through. Right after him would be Colonel Meisch. Colonel Meisch, again, is a York County guy. And he was lieutenant colonel. He would eventually be promoted to the colonel. He would be wounded at Antietam significantly. He was hit pretty hard, and it took him months to recover. Finally, he came back after the Battle of Fredericksburg, only to get wounded again at Chancellorsville. In terms of enlistment, their term of enlistment concluded in May of 1863. Anybody who knows about Civil War history knows May 1863 is a huge turning point. The thought was strong through the new enlistees that the war would be over in short order. The 130th was eventually assigned to the 2nd Brigade, 3rd Division, 2nd Corps, known as the Fighting Second, and they were in the Army of the Potomac. With only a fleeting time and training, it wasn't like boot camp is today. They had very little training, and some of these folks didn't even know how to use a musket properly. There was very scant training. Confederates are on the move. We got to get people out into the field. When I was when we were getting ready to that was during the Vietnam War. Normally it was like 12 weeks. I think we went through in 9 or 10, something like that, because they need cannon fodder overseas. So they just got us through. That's what they're doing here. With only a fleeting time in training as support in Washington, D.C. defenses, musket and artillery fire was clearly heard emanating south of the capital. Private Jones was an ear witness to the battles of Second Bull Run and Chantilly. Once again, he was an onlooker of horses, wagons, civilians, and soldiers streaming back from the battlefield, being in sharp contrast to the patriotic spirit he saw in Carlisle and Harrisburg. The panicked arrivals brought with them every imaginable rumor of horror. All were replete with disaster. The army looked forlorn, if it could be called an army. New leadership was on the horizon in the form of George B. McClellan, at least for the time being. Following the reorganization of the army after Bull Run, the Bull Run debacle, yet with little training, the 130th Pennsylvania with Private Jones embarked on the first of 3 campaigns. The first began in Maryland and ended for many of his regiment along a creek called the Antietam. Present under their division commander, who is William French. He is known as Blinky. Apparently he had a tick, and when he got excited, the tick would be very much agitated and noticed. So he was known behind his back. That's Blinky. And the 2nd Brigade was led by Colonel Morris. Received their instructions to advance to the left of General Sedgwick's division, turn south, and attack the enemy's right flank. These folks have been in service for 1 month. They don't have battlefield training. They're not even that familiar with how Napoleonic tactics are going to be used on the field with turning and doing flank movements. This must have been an interesting thing to see. Now, they're not the only ones. There are many on this field that June, July to August, those recruits that came in, hardly any of them had any military training. Those orders took them through the William Roulette outbuildings, orchards, and fields to the road which gave access to the farmstead. And this was a local man here in Carlisle, had drew this, John Hayes. Some of you might know John Hayes. His house still stands out that way, I believe, somewhere. And so he draws this. I'm going to just step over here a little bit. I drew in, the brigade is made up of 3 regiments. The 108th, I got a pointer for a reason. The 108th New York here, and that line stretches way down here a ways. There's about 650 to 700 men in 130th, stretching from Company B all the way up here, right here. And then the 14th Connecticut stretches way up here again. So this line is coming across. But inside of this is the farmhouse, the spring house, outbuildings, a barn. And so the 130th, we're going to see what they're going to have to do here in just a moment. This is, if you ever get a chance to go to Antietam, been to Antietam, please do if you haven't. This time of the year, before the bugs get out, is a good time to do that, those little ticks. This has been redone a little bit now. This building here, this front has been taken off, and this has been taken back into period, so it's this. And this is the spring house. Interesting, spring house is almost untouched. You walk here, you walk through this area, this is what it looked like. Matter of fact, there was a guy before this was bought by the government who was allowed to do some relic hunting on the property just on the other side of this little knoll. Oops. This on the other side of this little knoll, the proprietor had a line for drying wash. And he gets a beep, beep, beep. He pulls out a 20-pound unexploded artillery shell, laying in the yard for over 100 years. Well, in the ground. So this whole place was a hospital. They had to, matter of fact, as you recall, right here, what'd you do? Thank you. I did that once before. That really spooks me when stuff goes away. Right here at the spring house, Company A. You can see my arrow I drew in here. 2 companies had to squeeze through here. They had to make their way. Company B had to squeeze in and come out here. They had to get around these buildings and then reform out here in the garden. So they were going literally through here. They had to squeeze through here. This is an uphill thing. They had to go up, over, and here's the barn, which saw some incredible doctor work. What am I doing wrong? Where's my tech guy? We better keep going, or something bad's going to happen. Keep going. All right, we're down here. Cedric's farmstead. I'm not doing anything. Trying to mind my business here. Arriving around 9:30 a.m., the 130th, held a slight rise of ground about 60 yards in front of the Confederate line, which was firmly anchored in the farmland, together with other regiments in the Confederate brigade. However, directly in front of the 130th was a brigade of veteran Alabama infantry. For over 3 hours, the 650, maybe 700 men of the 130th, including Private Jones, poured musket fire into the ranks of the Alabamians and the left flank of companies of the 2nd North Carolina, facing them from the lane. Stubbornly, the 130th held its position until 1:30, when Private Jones and the survivors of the 130th were ordered to pull out and replenish their exhausted ammunition. Now, if I can, without something else happening, we saw that barn, and there is the barn. The farm is the house. The roulette house is right there. The barn is here. I'm not convinced that this building is not there at the period. I think it was, but some say it wasn't. Okay, here's the line coming through. Now, there was a brigade go in before they got there. But this could easily have been the 130th, because that's exactly the approach that they would have used. The only downside is this rascal here. We'll get to that in a few moments, if it's still up there. Here you can see basically what I was describing. The roulette farm is here, and the barn here. They're coming down, they're reforming here. You can see the 108th is over here, the 14th Connecticut is here, the 130th is in the middle. It is in the middle. If you view the entire battlefield, you would find the right flank, the Union Army's here, the left flank is down here toward Burnside Bridge, kind of. And smack in the middle are these guys at the Bloody Lane. And in the middle of the middle is the 130th Pennsylvania. You can't get much of a hotter spot. You can go right to this spot and you can stand here. This fence is still standing. It's a little bit grown up in here, but that's still standing. You can walk back this lane. The clip house is gone, but you can walk back here and you can walk through this. The whole area is open to walking through. So you can get the idea. Here is where the 130th is. This is the regiment, the brigade that went in before. And here's the Alabamians and North Carolinians. So who's in here? Alabama Jones. Who's here? What's the chances of that? It's going to get worse.
Did he know at the time?
Not a bit.
Okay,
We're getting to that.
okay, sorry.
No, that's what I meant. It has been estimated that this regiment alone, not the rest of them that you see there, this regiment alone, up to 52,000 rounds were fired into the Bloody Lane at the Confederates by the 130th alone. And now you have other regiments, so it gives you an idea of the volume of fire going in there. And another idea what's going on. Before the pullout nearing at 11:30, on their right flank, movement of the 27th North Carolina and the 3rd Arkansas. That would be right up in here. They were down here, remember, right by this line. Then all of a sudden the Confederates are now flanking this way. Something else is happening down here. And this is all done in the heat of battle, confusion, smoke. The North Carolina 3rd Arkansas regiments obligated 130th, along with the fragments of other federal regiments from their brigade, were required to change front and face this new danger, though many were out of ammunition. So you see the pickle that they wind up in here. We're going to go on to a little bit later. No, let's pick it up right now. Simultaneously, an additional Confederate flanking movement, which I just mentioned, was taking place directly behind the newly formed federal line. So here's 130th dealing with this. The 1st Delaware is almost isolated, but they're able to take care of themselves. But behind them, oh my gosh, there's some Alabama troops again. There's some Alabama troops down here. Actually, they're moving. That's the 9th Alabama. These troops are now moving across this area, and they're attacking here, which would have been right in the back door if these federal reinforcements weren't here, being right in the back door of these guys. And there's Alabama, one of the many Alabama regiments. It was, in fact, producing a pincer move. Just in time, the 81st Pennsylvania and 5th New Hampshire blocked the route the Confederates were attempting. One element of the attacking rear federal column was the 9th Alabama. Private William McKinnon, who is in the 130th, told the pension board in an affidavit on behalf of James Jones, quote, "He told me he was from Alabama, so we called him Alabama Jones. He never told me his real name. Yet, from his dialect and idioms, I knew he was from the South. He seemed to be afraid of capture. Duh. I remember cautioning him, if captured, do not talk. Your dialect will give you away." This is what was left of the Bloody Lane. That one picture, there's a series of them, you maybe have seen these before. Interestingly enough, the 130th was given orders to stay behind when the army moved on. The 130th stayed behind and helped to bury these people. Interesting thing is, most of these people here are men of the 130th. I never knew that until I researched it. Most of those men, many of them, are of the 130th. They are survivors. Is it possible that Mr. Jones is there? It's possible, but I don't know. We'll never know. From there, they moved then to, this is the picture that I got regarding, I picked this up at a show, an antique show, and it's the Bloody Lane, and it was dated 1880s. You can see how open this was. This is all open field. Near those 50,000 bullets or whatever that one regiment fired, probably many, many tens of thousands more, they're all back here. In the parking lot, up over the field, they're all over the place. And to prove it, you say, prove it. Okay, there, I proved it. I was walking in that area, and a groundhog was digging a hole, and sure enough, there was a fired mini ball. I don't have the mini ball, so don't accuse me of walking off of that. I do not have that mini ball. It was fired sometime by some Yankee regiment between 9:30 and 1:30 on September 17th, 1862. Who fired it, we do not know. It's a 58 caliber, that I do know. And it's probably a Yankee bullet, and it's probably from a Springfield. Many of them had Springfields. So they go to Harper's Ferry. Private Jones, wait a minute, I got one more yet. And that's this guy. This was a Confederate shell. It looks a little long there, doesn't it? This is a Confederate shell that was found right out in front of the Bloody Lane on private property before the government had purchased it. This was found by a friend of mine, and I know about where he found it, right out in front of the area where that tower is. If you know where that tower is, there's a visitor's tower there. It wouldn't do a lot of damage, but woe to the man who stopped it. No, the man wouldn't stop this. The idea of these solid ones, they had explosives too, but the solid ones would hit the ground, bounce up, ricochet, and just like a stone across the water. So anything between there is going to get this. You can view that. Don't drop it on your foot if you want to. It's about 10 pounds. Jones remained on the firing line throughout the fight at the Bloody Lane, sustained astonishingly no injury. The regiment moved to Harper's Ferry and Bolivar Heights, where they would receive their colors. They did not have, this is Bolivar Heights, beautiful place to go. It's just wide open fields. Can you really see that there? No, it doesn't show it too well, but it's wide open. Look at this, it's beautiful down there. They received their colors at Harper's Ferry or Bolivar Heights. They did not have their national colors at Antietam. That's what I'm saying. When I showed you that one picture of the drawing of them coming across, that regiment was there, had a flag, unless it was artist's privilege to do that. They didn't have this. This was given to them at Boulevard after Antietam. But they had to have had some kind of flag. They had to. And I think they did, but there's no recording of it. We'll get back to the holes that are in it. Pennsylvania state flag. He also shared the fortunes of his regiment in the subsequent campaign in December at Fredericksburg. The 130th Pennsylvania, the same division under General French, frontally assaulted the stone wall at the foot of Marie's Heights, which was in front of yet another sunken road. Again, you can see them right here. Anybody been to Fredericksburg?
Mm-hmm.
That breaks my heart. Fredericksburg breaks my heart. This is all battlefield. The only thing that remains is, I think, a little bit of stone wall here, and the rest of it is all housing. It's all gone. It's the equivalent of taking the area up at Gettysburg where Pickett's charge was and build everything out there up to where the Virginia Monument is. All that would be all built up. It's all gone. That's our lost history. But it is what it is. So the 130th is here. The 130th will get through Mercer Square, and they will make it to about here. Nobody will get through. I even know where Colonel Zinn was killed. It's recorded in, basically, we know where it's at. I didn't bring a picture because he's not the subject here. But he was killed right out in front of the wall trying to hold that flag. Another view of that is here. The 130th would be somewhere in here. The stone wall runs along here, the Confederates, where they were. They would have been in this general area. And this is how it's depicted. And it's all built up. Now, there are a few of the houses still standing. I think that one stands. It's been reconstructed, and I think that one stands, I think. Yeah, in his house, Stratton is up in there. And there's a house along the way here that still stands. The rest of it is pretty much gone. Losing their colonel, Henry Zinn, in front of the stone wall, the regiment. Well, let's just take another quick look at this. The flag. The flag sustains most of its damage at Fredericksburg, although it does at Chancellorsville, but not so much there. At Fredericksburg, there's about 36 bullet holes through it. And the flag is 6 feet, almost 6 feet by 6 feet. So it's big. It's real big. Why is it big? So, yeah, so you can see it. The color bearers are the ones who will, in effect, direct the regiment. So if the colonel says go forward, the colors go forward, the regiment, and all this noise, see their colors moving forward, they go forward, they come back. 2, it is the heart and soul of what you are defending. That is your family. That is your home. That is your heritage. That's everything that you believe that you're willing to die for. And the third thing about the colors is that is the thing you will not lose. You will die before you give up your colors. And many, many have. Some have lost their colors. The 130th did not. In 3 battles, they did not lose their colors. Sustained much damage, and even the 9-foot flagpole had a bullet zipped through it also. A couple of the color bearers were shot down. That's when Colonel Zinn stepped in to pick up the colors, and he would die for his effort. He's buried not far from here. On my way out, I passed it, Mount Zion Cemetery on 74, just south of us. He's buried in there, in honor. Losing their colonel in front of the stone wall, the regiment, along with the army, recrossed the Rappahannock River to yet again reorganize and be refitted at Falmouth. This is an original drawing. I got it from the Historical Society somewhere in Fredericksburg. And basically the 130th would have been, let me orientate you. Route 95 comes right down through here. There's Falmouth. Route 95 comes down here. Fredericksburg is down in this, over here. So 95 comes down here. And there's Route 17 comes across into Falmouth. Comes right through here. So that gives you, look, 95, 17. So this whole area had tens of thousands of Union soldiers living in the winter from November through May, all living in this area for 6 months. What did it look like, I wonder? Well, that's what it looked like. There's one tree left. There's your token tree. Where are the rest of them? Well, there. They're all. So the problem, this is 110th Pennsylvania at Falmouth. A couple interesting things. Next time you travel 95 north or south and you get by, I think it's exit 130, which is Falmouth, just slow down and just look around, because you are in the middle, almost, in the middle of the Union camp that was there for 6 months. What would you see if you got off the road? What you would see is new growth, but right here, there's a hole. This area looks like the moon. The men would dig out a hole. They would put their tents up over that hole so they can stand in their tent. And they would probably put some flooring in it. They're still there. right along 15, right along 15. I walk through this area, and over here is where 15 is. One of the on-ramps is right here. And you hear tires, junk laying through there. And here's another look. There's one that's it's still there after 150 years. 51, 2, 3, 4. 154 years, it's still there. And they're all over the place. It's amazing. Okay, let me go on. Throughout back up. Losing their colonel, I mentioned that. Yet again, reorganized and are refitted in Falmouth. Mercy comes Jones's and the regiment's way in the form of missing the ill-fated mud march. They were left behind when this debacle of a mud march took place. Though the Army of the Potomac's, this is the Army of the Potomac's Valley Forge, there in Falmouth. Private Jones remained in camp, enduring the privations and hardships and observing campmates dying from exposure and disease. Some of them literally froze to death and starved to death, some of them. One of them was my great uncle. I said, Edward and Daniel. Daniel died. He died in Falmouth, and he's buried up in Washington in one of the many cemeteries. Though some of the regiment deserted, Jones was true to his oath taken at Camp Curtin. One more campaign, and the last that he endured, was in the spring of 1863, Chancellorsville. During that 4-day struggle in May of 1863, the 2nd Brigade was moved into line of battle, generated by the collapse of the Federal 11th Corps the night of May 2nd. We have the Confederate line here, advancing down, I think this is the Orange Plank Road, and right here. Where are they? In the middle again. Antietam in the middle. Fredericksburg against the stone wall. Marie's Heights, Chancellorsville, right in the middle of the entire Federal line, right along the road. You can go to the spot. This road's still there. Well, it's not a road so much, it's like cut through the woods, but it's still there. You can track right where they were. Amazing. Though some of the regiment deserted, Jones was true to his oath, as I mentioned, at Camp Curtin, there at Chancellorsville. Yet again, after General Hooker lost his will to fight, the Army of the Potomac fell back to their old campground at Falmouth. The regiment was organized. Now this is the beginning of May. They go out in May. The 9 months is over. They were organized to muster out. Transportation was secured for the trip back to Pennsylvania, and in a few days, they arrived at Camp Curtin for formal muster out, return of weapons, equipment, and pay due, including the balance of their bounties. Private Jones disappears from view again until Congress passed legislation providing pensions for disabled soldiers, sailors, and widows and orphans. Private Jones, now Mr. Jones, began his request for pension in 1891 at the age of 52, kind of a youngster by our standards. He was then living in Vieta, Indian Territory in Oklahoma. The process was time-consuming, which required witnesses to provide positive identification of the individual requesting pension. The process for Mr. Jones took years, as was characteristic in those days. Now, he's got a problem. He hasn't told him his real name. You don't do that to the government and think you're going to get away with it. The Board of Pension inquired as to where he had been living, how he had been employed, and the state of his health. He was asked to describe any ailments or afflictions in his past to his present. And this is he, much later. This is a quote from him, and you'll notice about him. I lost sight in my right eye. I had a severe attack of winter fever in Flora, Illinois, in the fall of 1864. Captain Cole of Chicago called for 100 men along in the summer of 1864 to gather horses and cattle for the soldiers, and I volunteered as one of the men. We went to Nashville, Tennessee. We took a herd of horses from Tennessee about 80 miles through the rain and mud, and I got unfit for duty and was sent away. Captain Cole gave me a discharge. I was in the company about 1 month. I got the winter fever, and for that reason, I was discharged. After that, I worked on the Ohio and Mississippi Railroad until 1865, moving from place to place. As a prerequisite for additional evidence increase, Mr. Jones was obligated to present additional witnesses from his regiment who could make positive identification and validation for the claimant. One of the respondents was Simon Whistler, who, after the war, became a physician in Bainbridge, Pennsylvania, over in Lancaster. Dr. Whistler observed in his statement in 1897, James Jones was known as Alabama Jones. His record as a soldier was good. He was a fellow whose antecedents were unknown, owing to his mysterious past. Close quote. This then generated more paperwork, since his identity became a bit of a puzzle to the pension board. Jones did not reapply for a claim until his name appeared again in 1912. There, his actual name was used, and then the board wished to know why he altered his name, and if he served in the Southern Army before his enlistment into the 130th Pennsylvania Infantry. With failing health, he continued the procedure to obtain pension, which he prepared from the National Military House in Leavenworth, Kansas. The commissioner wrote, quote, "The claimant should also state under oath his full and correct name and give his reasons for enlisting under an assumed name." He's buried, this is Masonheimer. He's just buried in the old cemetery here in Carlisle. A former comrade from his company, Mr. Lewis Masonheimer, wrote in response to the appeal for information on Jones' behalf, "I did not know that his name was John T. Scott. I was informed." Now, if you look that name up on the internet, you might find it. I doubt it, but you might find it. "I was informed at the time that he deserted the rebel army. He was a good soldier," close quote. Using his birth name of John Talbot Scott, named after his father, his story was somewhat exposed. Back home in Vieta, Oklahoma, in June 1913, Mr. Scott penned, quote, "The reason why I enlisted under an assumed name was because I was a Southern man and I did not want to enlist there under my name. I was afraid I would be shot," close quote. That did not satisfy the pension board. James Jones, a.k.a. John T. Scott, needed to offer more detail. Subsequently, in 1916, he exposed the rest of the story. In his own hand, he writes, "In the spring," actually it was in June, of 1861, "I enrolled in Greenville, Butler County, Alabama, in the Company G, 9th Alabama." Keep that number in mind. 9th Alabama Infantry. Served several months. I enlisted under the name of John T. Scott. While being transferred by railway from Petersburg, Virginia to Manassas Junction, I became engaged in a personal difficulty with a comrade whose name was Bob Vernon, or Robert. He calls him Bob Vernon. After which, and because of which, my friends advised me that I cease to serve with this company. He did better than that. He went home. Wherefore I returned home. Since the war, I resided. I've asked some colleagues who are familiar a little bit about his story, why did he have a conflict with this person, and was that so much that he deserted? We don't have any answer. We can only speculate. Speculation was he probably did not believe in the cause. He probably was caught up in the fervor. He's just 20 years old. He's caught up in this, and all the guys are going. And he got probably swept up in it, and he just doesn't believe in it. So he moves on. He continues by saying, Petersburg, VA, personally difficult comrade. I ceased to serve with company wherefore I returned home. Since the war, I have resided in Illinois, Alabama, Texas, Oklahoma for 45 years. He was eventually granted a monthly pension of $19 and an increase to $22.50 and later to $32 in 1918. He married Amanda Cherokee Duncan in a place called Going Snake District. Going Snake. Ladies, would you like to live there?
What state?
Oklahoma. Actually then, it was known as the Indian Territory. Now, Adair County, Oklahoma, in 1869. They sired 8 children between 1871 and 1893. Now, I found some of them, but I can't find all of them. I think I found 6. Their graves. I found one picture, John. That's his senior. This would be the 3rd. He's John Scott, and he would be the 3rd. And Susan, a sister, but a daughter. This was an infant. This was an infant that lived only 2 months. You can figure it out there. About 2 months and the child died. That's hard. That's Bertha. That picture didn't turn out too terribly well. And that, I think, is my last one for there. While in Oklahoma, he was known as Winchester Scott. Winchester Scott. Something don't sound right about that. Because he always carried a Winchester repeating rifle. However, that rifle was used on July 13, 1908, to dispatch a young woman he caught stealing blackberries from his patch. Shot her dead. He was convicted and sent to prison, but on June 18, 1912, he entered the soldiers' home in Leavenworth, Kansas. Amanda, his wife, collected a pension of $30, increased to $40, and in 1920, stemming from John's death, effective until her death, in November 30th, 1937. She lived all the way to 1937. John died from apoplexia, stroke, right? Yes. At 5 o'clock in 1920 at his home in Oklahoma, and is buried in the Landrum Cemetery. Oh, yeah, that's right. Well, there's George. He still had another boy. And there's James, another one of his boys, Charles. And there's the Landrum Cemetery. And there's John T. Scott, Company A, 130th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry. And not far from where he is also Cherokee, his wife, died in 1937. Now just for some interesting facts. At Antietam, and we'll bring this to a close in just a few moments. At Antietam, the 130th Pennsylvania Infantry was nearly flanked. You remember that picture? Was nearly flanked from the rear, as earlier described coincidentally. One of the cobbled together Confederate regiments in that flanking movement was the very regiment, the 9th Alabama. Remember, I told you, remember that? There is the 9th, and they were heading this way, right into their back door. The very regiment Private Jones deserted. It is no wonder that Masonheimer advised him not to speak if captured. If only he knew how close to capture he has really been. Look at their position. They have Confederates linking all around here. This is sort of a pincer move. These guys are in what we would call militarily a salient. A salient is a bad place to be. Crossfire, coming this way, and over this way. Really bad place to be. Had he looked over his left shoulder through the smoke of battle to his rear, the sight of the colors of the 9th Alabama would have sent a disquieting shudder through his body. Had he been captured that day by the 9th Alabama upon the fields of Sharpsburg, Bob Vernon, a comrade from whom John Scott fled, may have recognized him owing to the fact that he was still in the ranks and present with the 9th Alabama. John's story may have ended like so many thousands of others on that dreadful day in September 1862. In latter years, Jones must have given thought to the fact that the Alabama troops he spent 3 hours firing 80 rounds from his new 1861 model Springfield rifle musket were men from his own state. This family demonstrates how divisive the Civil War had been. Private Jones had been shooting down those from the state of his natural birth with whom he took an oath of allegiance to the Confederacy. Furthermore, federal forces had captured, this is why I couldn't find another grave from one of his brothers. Furthermore, federal forces had captured Jones's younger brother, Thomas, earlier in the year. Ironically, while Jones was firing into the troops of his birth state, that same month, just 550 miles north, in Camp Douglas in Illinois, Thomas died, a prisoner of war for the cause of the Confederacy. So this family was really divided. And I just close with a thought. The 130th had gotten out at the end of May. Not too long after that is when Lee, because of the victory at Chancellorsville, the outstanding victory, losing Jackson, unfortunately for them, they begun then the Northern Press, which would become the Battle of Gettysburg. The 130th is then mustered out. That brigade that they were in was filled in with another regiment. The 14th Connecticut and the 108th New York, they were in longer than 9 months. I think they were a 3-year regiment, I think. Regiments. So they would wind up along with the Union Army chasing Lee up to Gettysburg. Had the 130th remained, they would have been at Gettysburg. They would not only have been at Gettysburg, they would have been at another stone wall. That regiment, or that brigade that they were with, if you can picture the angle where Pickett's charge was, there's a copse of trees and the stone wall comes up, comes over, and there's an angle up. There's where they would have been, in the middle again. Anybody have any questions? I'm not a real deep scholar on some of these issues, but does anybody have a question? I'll entertain one. 2. Yes, ma'am?
Not being militarily minded, is there a strategy to putting certain units in certain places?
There is.
So they were centered for a reason?
Not necessarily for that reason. It turns out that however you move, there is some strategy involved. There definitely is some strategy. Many times it isn't. It's who gets there firstest with the mostest kind of thing. But at Gettysburg, I think, I'm a chaplain, I could say this. I think divine providence was working. There's no doubt in my mind. Because on that line at Gettysburg, when Pickett's men, Longstreet's assault took place, the commander of the Army of the Potomac was a Pennsylvanian, born in Spain, but Meade was a Pennsylvanian. You had one of the main lines right there was the 71st Pennsylvania, 70th, there's a couple numbers in the 70s that are there, the 69th Pennsylvania. They're the ones where Pickett's men are going to hit. They're Pennsylvanians on Pennsylvania land. They're literally defending their home. I think that was one of the reasons why, it's my opinion and I'm entitled to it, is that I think Lee did not realize who he was going up against there. I don't think he totally realized that that line that he once attacked, because that angle is usually the weak spot to attack, he is attacking there, but he doesn't know that that's lined with Pennsylvanians. And I might also say that the 69th Pennsylvania that was there did a yeoman's job, maybe. Yeoman's job staying there. And they were mostly Irish Catholics of the first generation. Amazing. There's a lot of fuss going on about immigrants, and I'm not into politics, don't care. But those immigrants that were there, first generation, Irish Catholic, did a lot to save our country. For whatever it's worth, take it home, it's free. Any other questions? Okay, you know what time is it?
25.
Really? Oh, that's almost an hour. Good. Okay, if you have any questions, come up and stop. You can pick that up if you want, but don't drop it on your foot. Thank you for being here. Have a nice afternoon.